Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we have my Game Week 16 preview, and of course because this is the final week before the World Cup, we're going to focus on 1 week punts and whether it's worth taking a hit and specific players that we should be looking at buying and also selling as well. If you are enjoying the content here on this channel, please do remember to like, comment and subscribe, but without further ado, let's jump into today's video. So as you might expect, when there's only 1 week before the World Cup and then we have unlimited transfers and essentially a complete reset, the focus for today is going to be on 1 week punts. And what I thought would be a good way to start this video is to go through some of the players that I'm potentially considering bringing in or that I think are good players to own for Game Week 16. It's incredibly important to note though, I think usually when you're bringing in players in FPL, you're probably looking at around 4 to 6 game weeks, or at least that would be the tip for me. I think in any normal circumstances, unless you're planning on playing a chip coming up or you've got a wild card or in this case, unlimited transfers, you normally don't bring in a player just for 1 or 2 weeks. You bring them in for about 3 to 5 minimum, 4 to 6 is usually what I look at. And I think when you are bringing in a player like that, there are definitely better players to bring in when you can look at underlying data, you can look at longer term fixtures, you can look at the way that the team is playing. But when it's just a 1 week punt, whether that be a free hit or whether that be bringing in a player only for 1 week, I think you can pretty much trust your gut feeling because it's very difficult to try and predict exactly when a player will get a return. I think if you bring in a player and say they've got good data and good fixtures, I would expect over the next 6 weeks they could get 3 to 4 attacking returns. That makes sense. But trying to predict exactly when that will happen is quite tricky. So I think when it's a 1 week punt, just trust your gut feeling and have a bit of fun with it. That isn't to say don't listen to what I'm about to say. It's not to say don't look at underlying data and don't look at the fixture. But if you've just got a bit of a feeling about a player, which does happen sometimes, you just get a player in your mind, by all means go for it because it's just as good as picking a player with decent data because again it's very tricky to try and place exactly when they will get that attacking return and when they'll get that haul, which is what we're aiming for really. We're aiming for those sort of 15 pointers. So that brings me on to the next point, which is the players that I'm looking at bringing in, I believe all have explosive ability. I'm not bringing in players that I think would steadily tick along and get 6 or 7 points each week. I'm bringing in players that I think have the ability, whether they've shown that in the past or what the underlying data would suggest, that they have that 15 plus pointer. Because I think if you're bringing in a player that tends to get assists here and there and they've got decent underlying data, but they never tend to explode, it's just not much fun for a 1 week punt. So there are players like that. For example, like a James Ward-Prowse. He's going to get a 15 pointer now, I'm sure, but he tends to tick along quite nicely. You wouldn't expect him to get that monster haul very often. So these are the players that I already own and I like, or I'm considering bringing in for Game Week 16. If you want the specific 1 week punts that I'm looking at, my team selection video will be live on Friday and I'll be going through some of the players that I'm personally considering. In this table here, I've got the player's name, I've got their price, I've got their minutes that they've played this season, their projected points for Game Week 16 courtesy of Fantasy Football Hub, their non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90, and then of course their fixture in Game Week 16. Of course I am only looking at players with decent fixtures. There are some players that are maybe in form and having good data, for example the likes of Alvarez and Callum Wilson, but I'm not saying Chelsea's a terrible fixture, I just feel like there are slightly better fixtures to target. So yes, there are some other players that aren't on this list that are really decent. Again, if you like them, by all means take a punt. And let me know down below, who are you currently considering bringing in with your 1 or 2 free transfers this week? Always interested to hear some slightly different options that maybe I haven't considered. So on this list, I've actually only got 2 defenders. Now the reason for that is naturally defenders have to really get a clean sheet and an attacking return to get a monster haul. And whilst that is possible for defenders in any given week, again, trying to place exactly when that will happen is very tricky. So what I'm looking at with the defenders is, do they play for generally a decent defence? Is it a decent fixture, preferably a home fixture if possible? And do they also have enough attacking potential where I would say every sort of 2 to 3 games I would expect them to get an attacking return? Because if they've got data which suggests every 10 games they'll get you an assist or a goal, that's not brilliant. And again, trying to place that in a specific week is quite tricky. So at the moment, the only 2 defenders on my watch list are Perisic and Trent. Let's start with Perisic. 0.51 non-penalty expected goal involvement. There's definitely the possibility, similar to how we saw in Game Week 15, that he plays in a much more advanced role in Game Week 16 due to Son being out. Kulusevski's obviously coming back from injury, as we'll discuss in a second. And they're just lacking Richarlison is injured as well, was the last player. So I think there's a good chance Perisic either plays as part of a front 3, as part of a front 2, and even if he doesn't, he's still very, very attacking in that left wing-back role, even in the right wing-back role when he occasionally plays it. So, by all accounts, wherever he plays on the pitch, I do really like Perisic from an attacking perspective. Now, recently, Spurs haven't been as great defensively, but I just think it's a nice fixture. Leeds at home. I would say it's a slightly better fixture from an attacking perspective than it is a defensive. By that, I mean, I could quite easily see Leeds scoring 1 or 2 goals here. But I just think that because Perisic has such great attacking data, I mean, he's got better non-penalty expected goal involvement than Eze, Trent, Kulusevski, Maddison, and the same as Bruno Fernandes. So even without the clean sheets, he's an exceptionally good asset. And obviously, if he gets an attacking return, he'll be good for bonus points as well. So let's see what the predictions say, whether Perisic looks like he's going to start. But if he does, and I make a defensive transfer, he's probably top of my priority list. But I do still like Trent. And I know a lot of people won't like him because of what's gone on so far this season. He's really struggled for clean sheets. Liverpool have struggled in general. But as you can see here, he's top for projected points. It's a great home fixture against Southampton. And whilst his data isn't as good as Perisic's, and it's definitely decreased from last season, he's still putting up 0.38 non-penalty expected goal involvement. So at the moment, Trent and Perisic are the two defenders that I'm considering for my team. When we move on to the midfielders, we've got sort of a few cheaper options. We've got Eze, Rashford, and then we start to move on, and Trossard. Then we start to move on to the slightly more expensive assets, the likes of Zaha, Kulusevski, Maddison, and I've got Fernandes as a really expensive one. I'm not going to discuss all of them in detail because, again, these are just some of the players that I'm considering. I think Rashford and Trossard, I've got exactly the same non-penalty expected goal involvement at 0.66. We've been talking about them for a few weeks now. I still think they're good assets to bring in. Rashford's got a really nice away fixture against Fulham at Craven Cottage, and Trossard's got Aston Villa at home. I think both of those are decent fixtures for different reasons. They're both putting up really good data. They've got decent projected points, and I would expect both of them to start and play the majority of minutes. So even if you feel like you've maybe missed the boat with either of these, I still think it's a good time to bring in Rashford and Trossard. And the thing is, if you bring in Rashford and Trossard now and they get another price rise, there's a good chance that you'll actually have them post-World Cup as well, especially Rashford, as the fixtures for Manchester United are really, really strong. So I still like Rashford and Trossard. You do have Eze at a slightly cheaper price. His data's not great, though. The only reason that Eze's on here is that it's Nottingham Forest. But again, it is away. Forest are pretty good at the City ground, and they've definitely improved in recent weeks. So I think the only reason I would go for Eze is maybe if I couldn't afford the likes of a Rashford or a Trossard. I've still got Zaha on this list, and I know a lot of people, again, won't be a massive fan of that, but he is still on penalties. His data's okay at 0.56 non-penalty expected goal involvement. He's got decent projected points, and it is a decent fixture against Forest. So I've got Zaha on there for that reason. Maybe not the best asset to buy because, again, when I'm talking about that explosive ability, I know he got a sort of, I think it was a 12-pointer in Game Week 15. He's not really shown much of that this season, though, and he doesn't tend to get multiple returns. He ticks along quite nicely. So I think the fixture's there, and the fact that he's on penalties is nice, but maybe there are slightly more exciting, different options to go for outside of Zaha. I definitely wouldn't be selling him ahead of Nottingham Forest. Then you move on to Kulusevski and Maddison at that sort of £8 million price range. Kulusevski massively depends on whether he's predicted to start and whether he's fit enough to start. He obviously got minutes in Game Week 15, looked pretty decent. And when he does play, he definitely looks like he's going to return in most games. His data this season isn't fantastic at 0.43 non-penalty expected goal involvement. That being said, he struggled with injuries, and also Spurs have struggled at points this season to sort of get going and score goals. So I think Kulusevski, if he starts, again, Leeds at home, it's such a nice fixture. I've definitely got my eye on him as a cheeky midfield punt. And Maddison has got the only sort of grey fixture according to the official FPL fixture difficulty rating. But I still think it's an okay fixture against West Ham. And Maddison's just looked really good. He's passed the eye test. His data's average, but he just looks like he's involved in absolutely everything. Now, of course, the England squad will be announced this week, so we'll know if Maddison goes to the World Cup. If he does go to the World Cup, as we'll discuss later in the video, does that mean that you don't want to go for him because maybe you won't want to risk injury? Or will he want to prove a point that he should be in the starting 11? And if he doesn't get picked for the World Cup, of course, you've got is he going to maybe try and prove a point that he should have gone to the World Cup? So we've got all of these narratives that we might have. I think either way, Maddison's still a really nice option. And maybe going under the radar just due to obviously the suspension that he got, was it ahead of Game Week 12? And just the fact that we've owned him a little bit this season already, maybe not looking like a new shiny toy. So definitely consider Maddison at that sort of mid-price range. And then the most expensive midfielder on this list is Bruno Fernandes at 9.8. I think I would probably just go for Martial or Rashford. We'll move on to Martial in a second. I think I'd probably go for Rashford, to be honest. But if you do want to go for a slightly different punt, I've got a feeling that maybe Ronaldo won't start this weekend for Manchester United. And if that is the case, Bruno Fernandes will be on penalties. He's on a few set pieces. And he's not been great in recent years. I think, obviously, when he broke onto the scene in FPL, he was absolutely ridiculous. But he still puts up okay data. And again, in a single week, I would definitely back Fernandes to get something. So if you do want to go for something slightly different and you've got some money in the bank, I don't mind Bruno Fernandes as well. And then we've got a few strikers. We've got Martial, Jesus, and Darwin. I think they're the only three on the list there. Starting with Martial, again, massively depends, similar to Kulusevski, massively depends on his fitness. He did again get minutes in Game Week 15. At the time of recording this, which is Tuesday evening, I think there's a good chance Martial does start. But again, we'll maybe get news throughout the week. We'll see what happens in the EFL Cup. We'll see what news we get. If Martial looks like he is set to start, his data is always fantastic. He's only played 129 minutes this season, but 1.01 non-penalty expected goal involvement. He gets opportunities. And when Martial and Rashford and Bruno are all in the same team, they're very, very difficult to stop. So I would fancy Martial to do fairly well if he does start. The only issue I guess you've got is that, number one, every time he starts recently, he picks up an injury almost immediately. And even if he doesn't pick up an injury, I wouldn't expect him to get more than 60 minutes. So you're not going to get the full 90 minutes with him. But I think, again, as a cheeky one-week punt before you get to sort of change your team around, I don't mind Martial in there. Jesus is actually probably at the moment the player that I'm most likely to bring into my team. I just think that he's been going under the radar because his conversion's been pretty poor this season. It's up to you whether you believe he's just got poor conversion or do you think he's maybe been slightly unlucky. For Man City in the Premier League in the past, he's also had relatively low conversion and he's actually underperformed his expected data. But as you can see here, 1.02 non-penalty expected goal involvement is exceptionally good. That's better than Salah in previous seasons. That's up there close to the likes of Darwin and Haaland as well. He's got some of the best data in the league. It's not a bad fixture against Wolves away. And Wolves aren't a team that just sit there and defend anymore. So it's a decent fixture. You know he's going to play a decent amount of minutes. 1.02 non-penalty expected goal involvement. There's very little to dislike about Jesus other than the fact that he's not necessarily been finishing his chances. And I suppose also, Arsenal aren't great away from home. They're much better at home at the Emirates. So there are, I guess, a couple of reasons not to like him. But for me, at the moment, I'm definitely considering Jesus as my one-week punt. And then Darwin is, in my opinion, by some distance, the best player to bring in for a one-week punt in Game Week 16, unless we get news that he's not predicted to start. But I don't see any reason why we would. 1.4 non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90. Decent projected points. It's a really nice fixture. That should say Southampton at home. I don't know why that says Southampton away. But Darwin, in my opinion, is the standout one-week punt. He's the sort of player where, when you look at his underlying data, he absolutely has an explosive potential in him. And I know we've been saying this for a few weeks and it's become a bit of a meme on various FPL channels. We keep saying one of these weeks Darwin's going to absolutely explode. He's going to get a monster haul. And that's just not happened yet. But I don't think just because it's not happened yet, we should let that deter us from the fact that his data's good. He'll get so many chances. And against Southampton, it's a really nice fixture. I definitely think you could do worse than Darwin. And for me, if I could afford to go to Darwin from Alvarez, who's the player I would likely sell if I were to make a one-week punt in my attack, I would definitely do it. And for those of you that can go from Mitrovic or Tony to Darwin, I would absolutely do it. I just think his data is so much better than those in and around him. The fixture's great, and Liverpool are still scoring goals, and they're attacking fairly well. So for me, Darwin is the standout. So putting that all together, a long time on the one-week punts, but I guess this is the major thing to discuss this week. I do like the Manchester United fixture, Fulham away, so I don't mind one of Martial and Rashford, Fernandes if you want to take a risk. With the defenders, I don't mind Perisic or Trent. And then for the attackers, if you can get to Darwin, it's got to be Darwin for me. But I do really like Jesus as well. I think you could take a punt on him just because, again, he's not a shiny new toy and maybe he's let us down earlier on in the season. The data's still really strong. Let me know down below who are you currently planning on using your transfer on, and are you maybe considering taking a hit, which we'll discuss later in the video. So I guess there's a small chance you missed it if you're not particularly active over on Instagram/Twitter and you maybe weren't watching a deadline stream just before the Game Week 15 deadline. But we did get team news around 20 minutes before the deadline that Haaland and Foden were not starting. As a result, KDB looked like he was always going to start anyway. Alvarez was going to start too in the absence of Haaland. So a lot of people took out both Foden and Haaland for the likes of a KDB or an Alvarez, or maybe they only took out Haaland. But a lot of people were left in a position where they maybe now don't own Haaland. And to bring Haaland back in is going to require a -4. So the question is, therefore, if you transferred out Haaland in Game Week 15 or you just don't own him, is it worth bringing him in as part of a hit for Game Week 16? So I guess the first thing to know is, does it look like he's going to start or not? The fact that he got minutes and looked absolutely fine realistically in Game Week 15 would suggest that he is going to start in 16. Also with the fact that he's not going to the World Cup, there's no massive issue with risking him just before the World Cup and that he might be injured and not be able to play for his nation. So I guess there's a slightly less of a risk there. However, I'll try and remember to flash it on the screen now. There is a quote from Pep this week which suggests that actually the injury is still playing him up a little bit and he's not perfect. I do think when you watch the video, when you actually watch Pep's press conference and his interview, I don't think it's as bad as it sounds when you look at the text on paper or on a tweet. So maybe we're over-exaggerating slightly. But I guess all of that to say that he's still not 100% by the sounds of it. And there's still a small chance he doesn't start. Whether or not we wait for the early team news again and risk the site crashing again, I'm going to discuss that in the next section. But let's assume that Haaland is fit. Let's assume he's back. If he is back and starting in 16, is it worth taking a hit to bring Haaland back in? And as a result, it's not just taking a hit to bring him in. You're removing one of De Bruyne, Salah, or Kane as part of a hit. Earlier on in the week, my initial reaction to this was no, because I think De Bruyne, Salah, and Kane are all good captaincy options. And I hate the idea of removing a really decent option as part of a -4 to bring in another decent option. It feels like gambling a little bit. Also, if you're doing that as part of a -4, you're not able to use your transfers on other aggressive moves. So maybe you would like to bring in the likes of a Perisic or a Trent or a Jesus, but maybe you're unable to do so because you're focusing on using your -4 instead to bring Haaland back in. So those were some of the reasons that I was initially thinking no. But having sat down and really thought about it, I think it probably is worth it because of captaincy. I'm never a massive fan of taking a hit to take out a really decent player for another decent player. But when captaincy comes into play, because obviously it's double points, it means so much more. And I think with his ownership at the moment, and I know a lot of people don't like to play according to ownership. I don't look at ownership massively, but you've got to remember most people own Haaland, and those that don't will still probably bring him back in. And if you own Haaland, and it looks like he's going to start, you're going to captain Haaland as well. So you're probably looking at him having about 180% effective ownership for Game Week 16, which if you're not interested and you don't know what that means, essentially you are going to lose 180% of Haaland's points on the field. So if he scores something like 17 points, which again is the upper echelon of what we're expecting, you'd lose maybe like 30 points plus on the field. Now, of course, you also have your captaincy option. So if Salah gets 1 or 2 returns and you captain him instead, you're absolutely laughing and you've not really lost out much at all, if at all. So realistically, it's if you fancy your captaincy outside of Haaland to get close to him or to match him, then don't take the hit. But if you don't want to take that risk and you think Haaland is the standard captaincy option, I personally would probably take the hit. So my final decision on it is yes, I have no issue taking out De Bruyne, Salah or Kane as part of a -4 to bring Haaland back in if you want to captain him and if you think he's the standout captaincy option. I'm very interested to hear your thoughts down below. If you are one of those that took Haaland out after the early team news, are you looking at bringing him back in? Is it going to take you a -4, a -8? Can you do it for free? And who are you bringing in as part of that switch? For example, if you're taking out De Bruyne and Salah, you're obviously bringing in Haaland for a striker, but who's the midfielder you get to bring in as well? Because I think that does massively impact how well I think that hit will pay out for you as well. Let me know down below in the comments. So I'm pretty sure most of you, unless you've been living under a rock or unless you're a super casual FPL manager, have probably seen in the recent weeks, we have been getting early team news as to whether certain players will be starting before the deadline. And also, the site has been crashing as a result. So in Game Week 14 and 15, Man City with the early kickoff, a lot of us wanted news around Foden, around Haaland, especially not only because that would affect transfers, but captaincy too. And because a lot of us sort of FPL YouTubers and people on FPL Twitter have been talking about this early team news, a lot of the casual managers have also been waiting to make their transfers. What that essentially means is that with about 15, 20 minutes to the deadline, 3, 4, 500,000 people, maybe even pushing 1 million, are all looking to make their transfers at exactly the same point. And the overload on the servers is causing the servers to crash. So the official FPL site crashes. The app's also very, very inconsistent as well. And we're left with a position where if we wait for early team news, so if we wait for these leaks sort of 15, 20 minutes before the deadline, yes, we're at an advantage because we get news whether Haaland's going to start. We get news whether our other City assets are going to start as well. Again, Man City are the early kickoff in Game Week 16, so there's a very good chance we'll get that news. But if anything over the last couple of weeks is to go by, it probably means the site will crash as well. So the question that people are asking me is, do we wait for potentially early team news again and risk the servers crashing? I don't want to get into a massive discussion about whether I think it's cheating or whether I think it's moral to use early team news. I'll give you a very brief opinion. I think it's absolutely fine. We have got a deadline of, let's say in this case, 11 a.m. I am allowed until 11 a.m. to make decisions and to make changes to my team, which is the deadline. And if I can get access to news about a certain player starting or not before that, of course I'm going to wait. Of course I'm going to use every legal advantage that I can in the game. And it is absolutely legal to use that. There's nothing in the rules which says we can't. So if I know I'm going to get news, why would I make a transfer before then? So yes, I think it's absolutely fine. I don't see an issue with it massively. I do understand that for people in different time zones, people that don't have access to social media, maybe they're at a slight disadvantage. That doesn't mean that I don't think we should use that. The other thing to note is if the deadline is 11 a.m., I think that the site should be able to deal with the fact that a lot of people want to make decisions up to 11 a.m. So I think that is on official FPL to try and improve the way the servers are run. I'm sure they will be taking our advice on board, or I hope they will be, and improving the servers. But again, that's a whole different discussion. Let's just say that we are going to get early team news, which looks probably quite likely. And let's say that, again, the servers are going to be at a massive risk of crashing because more and more people are finding out about this early team news. The question is, do we wait for potentially early team news again and risk the servers crashing? Or do we say, do you know what? I'm not going to wait for that because I don't want to risk not being able to make my transfers. I don't want to risk not being able to change my captaincy if I need to. I'm going to lock in my team before the team news and take no notice of the team news. I'll be completely honest, at the moment, I am planning on waiting for the early team news again, and I'm planning on risking the site crashing and not being able to use it. The important thing for me, though, is yes, I don't think it's our fault if we can't make transfers 20 minutes before the deadline. I think that if the deadline's at a certain time, I should be able to make changes up to that time. However, you now know the risk that you run by leaving your transfers until the last minute. So at this stage, after it happening 2 weeks in a row, you now have to accept responsibility. If you wait for transfers until the final 15 minutes before the deadline and you cannot get those transfers through, I don't think you can realistically go onto Twitter and go to FPL and start complaining about that. Yes, it probably is a bit unfair that you can't make those, but you've also gained the advantage of the early team news. So it's a risk-reward, pro-con sort of thing to discuss and to think about. I will wait for it, and I will fully acknowledge, and I'll hold my hands up. If I can't get my transfers through as a result of waiting for the early team news, I won't be complaining. I will accept that that is a risk that I run by waiting for the team news. So let me know down below what you're currently planning. I know that I potentially shouldn't even be talking about this because I'm just telling more and more people that we're going to be getting early team news, and we're probably just putting more and more of a strain on the service. But I think most people at this stage know we're going to get it, and I have absolutely no issue. If you tell me, Raptor, I'm going to lock in my team at 10 a.m. UK time on Saturday morning. I'm going to lock in my team on Friday night and just go and enjoy my weekend. You probably won't be at a massive disadvantage. I just think in my team, I'm looking to captain Haaland and I've got Alvarez in my team. And I think that's massive. If we can get news on Alvarez, which we might not anyway, it would allow me to either decide if Alvarez is starting and Haaland isn't, I'd captain Alvarez potentially. If Alvarez isn't starting, I would sell him. So it really does impact my plans. And the other final reason that I'm happy waiting for my team and making my transfers, as you'll see in my team selection video, my starting 11 and bench is really strong. If for some reason I missed the deadline and I couldn't make a transfer and I couldn't change my team, apart from wanting to know about captaincy with Haaland, my team's in such a strong position anyway that I don't really mind. I think if you're in a position where you want to change 2 or 3 players, then maybe you don't wait because you can't really run the risk of messing that up and missing out on bringing those players in. So as I said, let me know down below what you're currently planning. I don't want to get into a massive debate about whether I think we should or not, but feel free in the comments to have it out and have a bit of a chat down there, respectfully, of course, about what you think about the early team news situation. And also let me know down below, because it's a bit of a discussion on Twitter at the moment. Do you think they should change the deadline to the first kickoff? So in this case, the deadline would be at 12:30. That would reduce the load on the servers, and it would mean everyone has the same information available to them. Everyone knows the starting 11s for that first game. So do let me know what you think about that down below. I think that would help a little bit, to be honest. So I'm just going to rattle off some other sort of quick-fire answers about some questions that were asked me over on Twitter, as we always do at the end of these videos. So the first question was, is it a risk bringing in players that are selected for the World Cup? Is it safer to bring in the likes of Firmino, or if any of the England players are omitted from the squad, is it easier to bring them in because you know they're not going to maybe take it slightly easy, they're not going to come off early at risk of getting injured for the World Cup? I think maybe it's overthinking it slightly. And it depends which way you want to flip it. For example, let's choose someone like James Maddison. If James Maddison is selected, as I said at the start of the video, does that make him more likely to want to take it easy and come off early because he doesn't want to get injured? Does it make him more likely to want to play 90 minutes and show Southgate that he should get into the 11? And for someone like Firmino, is Firmino not going to put in any effort because he's not got a World Cup team to try and get into? Or is he going to put in loads of effort to try and prove a point? I think there's too much sort of narrative bias, and it's too difficult to know which way it's going to flip, and it just depends which way you frame it. So my honest answer is I'm probably not going to pay much attention to that at all. I'm just going to ignore it, bring in players that I think will do well, and hope that the fact that the World Cup is very, very imminent is not going to massively impact any of the players that I'm looking at bringing in or that I currently own. I'm sure it will, but I think trying to guess it too much is probably trying to get too clever with it this week. The next question is, if Foden plays significant minutes midweek, i.e. against Chelsea on Wednesday, I'm recording this on Tuesday, is he a sell? I wouldn't feel comfortable selling Foden for a decent fixture without knowing he's benched. I know he's been benched 3 Premier League games in a row now. There's no reason why he wouldn't get benched again 4th in a row. It's just if he starts, I would argue he's in the top 3 midfielders in the Premier League to own in FPL. His data's so good. He passes the eye test. When he starts, he tends to get 90 minutes. So unless he's confirmed to be out or he's heavily predicted to be benched, I'm not interested in selling Foden. But I do understand if he gets 90 minutes midweek and maybe Alvarez misses out and Mahrez only gets like 60, it probably looks quite likely that he'll be benched again. So it's up to you. I think trying to second-guess Pep probably isn't the best idea. So if I owned Foden and I didn't get confirmation, I'd be tempted to still keep him. The next question is, again, about City players. Ignoring the early team news, so let's say that we don't get it or people don't want to use it. What am I doing with Alvarez? Because I own Alvarez now. I did bring him in for game week 15. And what should you be doing with Alvarez? Again, it's a similar situation where unless he plays like significant minutes and is predicted to be benched in game week 16 by some of the people that predicted the lineups for Manchester City, I would probably keep him unless we get team news. But we're saying here, ignoring early team news, I'd probably keep him and hope that he starts. He can play through the centre. Alongside Haaland, I think Pep said on a few occasions, with teams that have a bit of a low block, they can play like a 4-2-4 or a 4-4-2 with Alvarez and Haaland alongside each other. Alvarez can also play on the right. And again, if Foden is in Pep's bad books and doesn't start again, and he doesn't want to start Mahrez, he can start Alvarez on the right wing. So I think there's a decent chance Alvarez does start. My honest opinion of it now, if you force me, I would probably say Alvarez is benched in this. I would say maybe he gets some limited minutes against Chelsea and then maybe comes off the bench in the Premier League. But he has been exceptionally good in the absence of Haaland playing up top for City. So I don't know at this stage. At the moment, I'm probably leaning towards selling him, but I would like early team news. It would make me feel a lot more comfortable selling a really good City asset before Brentford at home, because if he starts, he looks primed for another really good week and potentially another return as well. The next question is it worth taking a hit in Game Week 16? My honest answer is no, unless it's for captaincy. So basically no, unless it's for Haaland. I just think that you run with your team. The likes, like for example, my bench at the moment is Doherty, Gahey and Andreas. Is it worth taking a hit to bring in a player to play ahead of one of those, right? And the way that I think about it is, let's say that the floor of the player that you would play instead is 2. Let's say that Andreas Pereira gets 2 points, and instead I take a hit to bring in someone instead of playing Andreas. I would need that player to score 6 points that I bring in to pay back the hit. I would be at a net 0 points if they get 6 points. So what you're basically saying is the player you're bringing in needs to not only get more than 6 points, but the player you play instead would have to blank as well. If that player that you would play instead, such an Andreas Pereira, picks up a return, you not only need your player to get 6+ points, you're looking at probably 9 or 10 points from the player you bring in to pay back that hit. And that's just to pay back the hit. Then you would need them to sort of get 13, 14 points plus to make the hit worth it and to get some extra additional points. So when I'm looking at taking a hit, this is the reason I don't take a massive amount of hits unless it's for captaincy or unless it's ahead of a couple of double game weeks. And I think especially when it's only a single week, because if you take a hit for a player, it might not pay back in that specific week, but it might pay back over the next 4 or 5 weeks. When it's only for 1 week, I really don't like hits if you can avoid them. I personally would avoid them. So I'm going to say no, it's not worth taking a hit. Unless you're taking out a player that you think definitely blanks, and the player you're bringing in, you're 100% confident that they're going to get at least 1 return, preferably 2, or unless it's for captaincy, I'm not a massive fan of it. And then the final question is, what do you think about selling a player that you want post-World Cup? And basically the discussion here is around a loss of team value versus attacking Game Week 16. And the example that someone gave was Kieran Trippier. Now, a bit of a sort of humble brag, bit of a subtle flex here. I've owned Trippier since Game Week 1. So I bought Trippier for 5 million. He's up at, I believe, 5.9 million now. If I was to sell Trippier and then buy him back, I'm looking at losing about 0.4, 0.5 million, depending on price rises and price falls. It's a lot of money to lose on him. And I don't think that's worth it for one specific week. So I would say if you're going to lose more than 0.1 or 0.2 on a player, I probably wouldn't do it. The reason I say that as well is, can you realistically confirm that Trippier is going to blank in Game Week 16? Again, it's a similar thing where all you need is a single assist or a clean sheet from him, which is possible. We know how good he's been this season. And then it just doesn't... and then not only have you lost the value on that player, you've also probably brought in a player that has either matched or scored lower than Trippier. So I know it's only one specific example, but I think if you're looking at losing more than about 0.1, 0.2 million on a player, and assuming that the player has an okay fixture this week, or you can get away with benching them, I probably wouldn't. No, I wouldn't be looking at selling players that you're going to definitely want back post-World Cup. So the likes of a Trippier, there are other players as well, which maybe don't have a perfect fixture in Game Week 16. Either bench them, play them and hope they get something, but I wouldn't be looking at selling loads of players, because what you don't want to do is, yes, attack 16 and maybe get a small green, but then be going into your Game Week 17 unlimited transfers with like 0.8, 0.9 million pound less, where you've sold a few players that you have money tied up in. So my answer would be, try and attack Game Week 16 if possible, but try and do it by selling players that you don't have money tied up in, or players that you definitely know you won't want back on your unlimited transfer. So hopefully answering those questions has helped you guys. If there are any questions that I've missed out or any other dilemmas that you have ahead of Game Week 16, please do let me know down below in the comments. So guys, there you have it. That is my Game Week 16 preview. Hopefully it's been helpful for you. It's a little bit messy because it's only 1 week, so it feels like a free hit, or almost like the final game week of a season. It does feel pretty strange, but hopefully it was still helpful for you. As well as the usual asking you to like the video and asking you to subscribe to the channel as well. I'll ask you to do one more thing for me today. If you're still watching this, please do follow me over on Instagram at FPL__Raptor. I'm starting to use Instagram a little bit more, and I'm really trying to hit 5,000 followers by the end of the year going into 2023. So if you enjoy enjoy my content and you want to get to know me on a bit more of a personal basis, I guess, because I don't post a massive amount of FPL over there. It's more just some of the stuff that I'm doing. So if you want to see more of a personal side of me, I guess, please do feel free to follow me over there, and I'll definitely be using it more. I'll be using the stories feature as well, and I'll be posting some of the stuff that goes on in my everyday life as well. Until next time, guys, thank you very much for watching. Cheers. Bye-bye.